Hi, today on Relish Books, I'm going to be talking about Emily Bronte, the second in the series of 3 that I'm doing ranking the Bronte novels. So Emily, of course, only has one novel, Wuthering Heights, which is one of the most well-known of all the Bronte novels. And I think, to a certain extent, partly because it was her only book, and it's such a dark, exciting story that I think it kind of, there's almost kind of this idea that this is the story she had to tell, and it's kind of, shocking that this is the one story she wrote. I don't think it's because it was the only story that she had in her, though, because the book was published in 1847, just a year before she died at 30. So I believe she would certainly have gone on to written more if she had had the chance. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the book today. I feel like for me, it is the most intimidating Bronte novel to talk about. Because there's always this question for me. I can never really decide ultimately what I think about the book, whether I think it's great or whether I think it's just terrible. First of all, though, I need to correct a mistake I made in my last video. I don't know what I was thinking when I said that The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is the only Bronte novel from the perspective of a man, because there are a couple of others, so I just wasn't thinking. Wuthering Heights is, of course, from the perspective of Mr. Lockwood, who acts as kind of the third-person perspective for the novel. And, of course, a large chunk of it is told through the housekeeper's perspective, telling him Heathcliff and Cathy's story. And so we start right out with Mr. Lockwood coming to the moor and meeting Heathcliff. Like, very first page, you meet Heathcliff, who is one of the nastiest, rudest, meanest characters, or heroes, I should say, if you can call him a hero, in all literature. Someone who's not, you could argue that he is the bad guy in the story, but somebody who's, not just, the villain, but he's also the love interest for someone like that. He's about the darkest, worst person you could ever meet. And so, you have this meeting between the men where this newcomer is just treated horribly, and he doesn't know these people. He doesn't know anything about this. They're in this very isolated place. And I think it's something to just point out here. The story takes place on the moors, and the Brontes were raised on the Yorkshire moors, and something that people kind of marvel at a lot is how the girls produced such fascinating and deep and dramatic characters when they were so cut off from society, when they grew up knowing very few people, seeing very, very little of the world. It's like, how did they, come up with all this? And that's something that people act so surprised by. And certainly all of them were absolutely brilliant. But considering their upbringing, I don't find it odd, the themes of their books and the characters of their books, because when you are cut off from society, there's more room for your imagination. It's almost like this breaking outward. You live in your mind rather than in the world, and I think that can really help your imagination. And Charlotte and Emily and Branwell and Anne grew up together, just imagining these whole worlds together, and they built these whole imaginary worlds. They wrote plays together. They were always writing, and even as children. And I think that it's like, what better way could you grow up, to be able to produce these things? So I don't find it shocking, other than when you kind of accept that all of them are brilliant to begin with. And I'm not saying like born brilliant or anything, but that they cultivated that very clearly. And unfortunately, Branwell died before he had produced any novels, which I've always felt it would be so fascinating to see what he would have done, because all the sisters have their bit different styles, they're very different stories, and I just think it would have been really, really neat to see what he would have written, but we don't get to. So back to Wuthering Heights. Again, I just feel intimidated talking about this one because I don't actually like it. I can appreciate it. I appreciate the writing. I appreciate the unique characters. But it's not a pleasant book, and it's not supposed to be a pleasant book. It's very dark. It's very lonely and isolated. And there are no characters that you really like or connect with. You're more just kind of like watching in shock and amazement, kind of like watching these things unfold. So it is exciting, and they have this very passionate and tragic relationship, and while it's enjoyable to read about passion on this level sometimes, it is this brutal passion and almost like this animalistic love rather than human love. And I think that's what draws people to the book in some sense, because it's interesting. But to me, that's not a true love story, you know? Love shouldn't be brutal. Love isn't. They say that they love each other, but really they have this immense attraction and need for each other that I don't think should really be called love. Because love is gentle and kind, and it's putting the other person first and making that choice. And you see none of that with these characters. They are incredibly selfish, even while being wholly devoted to each other in a sense. I mean, of course, Catherine did marry someone else, but her heart was always Heathcliff's. So yeah, it's kind of this like, is it great? Is it not? I think it's worth a read, especially if you're reading all the Bronte novels. This is the one that stands out the most as the different one. Because while Anne's books are kind of forgettable, maybe even boring, and Charlotte's books are so intricate and great, but they kind of take these ordinary lives and make them so interesting. And certainly there's drama in her books too. But Wuthering Heights, I think partly again because it was her only book, it just stands out as like this, I don't know, this dark night almost. It's this such a dramatic and passionate story about strange people, and it has a touch of the supernatural, just a little bit. Actually, multiple of the Bronte books have this little bit of like have a slight touch of the supernatural, like Jane Eyre has it. It's a little bit in this one. You don't ever really know if it's true or not. There's this idea that they are able to commune as ghosts. I don't remember how much that's actually fleshed out, but so it's kind of an eerie story. You could almost think of it in some ways as like a not quite horror, but almost on the edge of that. Sometimes I feel like how people see it, because there are lots of readers that are drawn to that darker genre, and this book definitely has that. There is darkness, there is violence, or at least violent natures, tragedy, and then at the end there is also a little bit of happiness. There is a romance that ends a little better, but it's with some characters that we aren't as invested in, I feel like. So it's like, yes, this is a sweet end to such a tormented story, but I didn't care that much. It's like, yeah, that's sweet, that's nice, that it's not just entirely dark and black, but, you know, who are these people? Like, not that you don't know the people, not that you aren't introduced to them, but they just aren't developed very much. They aren't the, Heathcliff dominates the book. That's the thing about him. And so everything else is kind of pale in comparison. But there's a little bit of happiness in it, so that's nice. A little bit of sweetness, maybe a tiny bit of redemption for Heathcliff, which I think is really what makes the book worth reading. Even if it's just a little, maybe a hint. But, yeah, definitely interesting. Not my favorite. Again, very, very unpleasant book. And I don't know if I've actually ever talked to somebody who said this was their favorite book. Obviously, I see it on lists all the time. I see it listed as authors' favorites. But I'd be really interested to talk to somebody who really loved it and hear what they had to say about it and why they loved it. Because, yes, it's just very, very unpleasant, but definitely wonderfully written. So that's Emily, and next time I'm going to be talking about my favorite and most people's favorite, Charlotte. So thank you.